All right. This is Mind Rehab Book Review Live. Thanks for joining the live, whether you live watching or you watching the replay. This is actually week 3 of the live, so we are doing the countdown to launch. I'm doing this for the next 6 weeks leading up to the book launch. So I'm excited. The book is getting prepared to be printed and the rollout. So this is week 3 of Mind Rehab. If you missed any of the previous weeks, if you're watching live or you're watching the replay, I put the link to the Mind Rehab community in the chat. So you can go back and watch the previous weeks, listen to the previous weeks, and you can get all caught up on the chapters. So this is week 3. So this is kind of like the midway point. So I'm going to do a little bit of a review. And then tonight we're going to go over chapters 8 through 10. So tonight we're gonna go through chapters 8 through 10. I'm gonna do a little review since we right in the 3 week point, and we'll go ahead and get started on the previous chapter. So to recap, Mind Rehab is the title of the book, and Mind Rehab is the process of repairing what's broken inside and stop living by trial and error. And so the full mind rehab process is 5 phases. So I'm gonna go over the phases real quick just to recap. So phase 1 is the planning phase. Phase 2 is the demo phase. Phase 3 is the restoration phase. And phase 4 is the improvement phase. And then the last phase is the maintaining phase. So that's the full mind rehab process. So this book is for the man who's tired of living life just winging it. The process, the life lessons, the experiences, the examples that I use in the book will help you to improve how you think, rediscover your genius, and live a fulfilling life. So it's a practical blueprint so that you can be who you want to be, do what you want to do, and have what you want to have. So if this is your first time joining the book review, the previous weeks are available in the community page, and I put that in the chat. So tonight we're reviewing chapters 8 through 10, and this is really getting into the most important parts of the mind rehab process. So chapter 8 is titled Removing the Negative, Self-Defeating Thoughts, Actions, and Feelings That Have Been Holding You Back. And so chapters 8 through 10 really dive in and get into the demo phase in the mind rehab process. So with rehabbing houses, the demo phase is where you start to strip things away, where you start to throw things out that don't work anymore, that's outdated. You get rid of things. So you rent a dumpster, you get a crew, you start getting rid of things. You starting to bust up stuff, whether it's sheetrock or cabinets or countertops, stripping up carpet, things that don't work anymore. So in the demo process of flipping houses or rehabbing houses, you rip away everything that's not working anymore or what you want to throw away or get rid of. The demolition process is a little different with the mind rehab process than it is with rehabbing houses. So let's take, for example, replacing a refrigerator. The refrigerator may be too small for your needs, or it may be ugly. It could be pea green, but it still may work. You don't want to just throw out the old refrigerator before you buy a new one. It's the same way with rehabbing your mind. So you get rid of the negative thoughts, actions, and feelings by introducing new ones. And so you don't just think you're going to just have a blank slate, no negative thoughts, no negative feelings, no negative actions. You get rid of the old ones by introducing the new ones. It's been said that we are what we think about all day long. So your thoughts are the first thing that needs to be swapped out in the mind rehab process. So our thoughts determine our actions, and our actions determine how we feel. So in the book, I talk about the number of thoughts that we have per day. So I did research on our your mind and our thought process, and so it said that the average person can have in between 6,000 and 70,000 thoughts per day. And so of those thousands of thoughts, about 90% of them are repetitive. So what's even more concerning is the fact that about 80% of the repetitive thoughts are negative. So why is this? Why do we think so many negative thoughts, and why are they repetitive? So some people say it's like a survival mechanism. So like our it helped our ancestors survive and stay away from danger. It's my suggestion is that we've developed like a default, like a negative default in our culture. What I mean by negative thought is that we automatically think negative versus positive because it's been ingrained in our culture. So just like think about how like when we greet each other with words and stuff like "How are you holding up?" And then we respond with words like "Oh, not too bad." And then we bet or we do things or we compete and we say, I probably won't win, but here goes nothing. It's kind of ingrained in our culture to default to negative. In the book, I talk about how a lot of people feel like it's more disappointing to get your hopes up and things not work out than to automatically things won't work out and be right. That's like a terrible way to live, right? So not only do I want to help you change your thoughts and how the average person thinks, I also want to get away from being the average person. Who says you have to think and be like the average person? It's a choice that we make, and we have the ability to change our thoughts. And so I talk about this in great detail in the book. So not only do we have the ability to improve the quality of our thoughts, but it's a critical part of the mind rehab process is to slow down and limit the number of thoughts that we have per day. So this can be done by things like meditation, exercising, and saying affirmations. And so these are things that I go through in greater detail in the following chapters. But to stop thinking negatively, you have to slow down and limit the number of thoughts that you have, period. Um, so let's talk about some of our negative actions and decisions. So let's talk about some of our negative thoughts, actions, and decisions. So let me get back to my right screen here. Um, it's hard to move when you think I'm stuck. It's even harder to take action when you feel stuck. And so the negative feelings are the things that really has us feeling like we're stuck. And so I give you an example in the book. I talk about your negative feelings. So I have this story that I talk about in the book. I talk about when I was in the kindergarten. So when I was in the kindergarten and I was finishing up the school year, my teacher scheduled a meeting with my mom. And so my teacher scheduled a meeting with my mom. And so automatically I'm thinking, I did something wrong, I'm in trouble, or something like that. Turns out that the teacher thought that she wanted me to take some assessments to assess my level of learning. And so I thought I got a bad grade or I was doing wrong or something like that. Turns out that the teachers wanted me to skip the first grade and go to the second grade. So I went to a Catholic school when I was in kindergarten. So they started putting me in different classes and giving me these different assessments to assess like what grade level should they put me in, should they skip a grade and things like that. And so they determined that the things that I would learn in the first grade, they felt that I was already advanced and I didn't have to go through the first grade. I could skip to the second grade. So my mom didn't think that was a good idea. She thought I was going to be bullied or she wanted me to be like a regular kid. I'm over here thinking like, bro, I'm about to be like Doogie Howser. You see what I'm saying? So she felt like I would get bullied or I need to stay in my right grade. And so I ended up going to the first grade just like everybody else. But for me, I felt like a genius. I felt like the smartest kid in the world when they recommended that I could skip the first grade. So just the simple fact that they thought I was smart enough to skip the first grade was good enough for me. I didn't even have to do it. So, at this age, that like boosted my confidence in myself. So that early experience made me feel smart. So I never forgot that experience and how it made me feel. To this day, I never forgot that experience and how it made me feel. So I know right now we're talking about negative feelings, but that's just an example in that story to show you how powerful feelings are. Something that I felt from the kindergarten, I never forgot about that. So during this process, you'll see that feelings are one of the most important things in the mind rehab process. So thoughts become things when you feel them. So this works in a positive sense, like with my kindergarten story, but it also works in a negative sense too. So our subconscious can't distinguish good, bad, right, wrong. It only registers what is. And what is the sum total of our thoughts, our actions, and our feelings. And so to remove the negative thoughts, actions, and emotions that have been holding you back requires that you introduce new ones. And so that's what we talk about in the book. So mind rehab is a process that will show you how to do just that. And so we're in the process of learning how to remove our negative thoughts and feelings in these chapters. So let's go to chapter 9. So, chapter 9 is titled Your False Self and How Not to Be Fooled with It. Now, I give you another story and example from real estate. So, if you're a shady investor or you trying to get over on somebody, like um, not so much here, but I've been in houses and I've shown properties where the property had foundation problems and the people put wall, a second wall in front of another wall. So it was a foundation problem, like a bowing wall or a crack, and they put a whole nother wall in front of it to hide it. Um, it's like putting lipstick on a pig. So an investor may know that it's a major problem with a house that may cost 20,000, 50,000, may be difficult to do, and they'll replace the countertops, they'll put new carpet on there, all the things that make a house look flip. But the actual foundation, what makes a house, is not repaired, is not restored. And so you have to focus on what's the real you. And so a lot of people, they think when they go to look at a house, they focus on, oh, this has brand new carpet, or it has new cabinets, it has new things like that. Well, investors like us, we look at the bones, we look at the foundation, we look at the structure, we look at the things that really make a house a house. And so chapter 9 goes through your false self and how not to be fooled by it. Like I talked about a couple weeks ago, I talk about how, a lot of times we change a lot of things in our lives without changing ourselves, without changing our mentality. We change jobs, we break up with somebody, we get into a different relationship, we change everything but ourselves. We change everything but our minds, and then you repeat the same cycle over and over and over. And so the mind rehab process and the different chapters and the different phases stops you from winging it, doing the same thing over and over, trial and error. And so chapter 9 is about your false self. So just like your false self, the real house is not the new stuff, the shiny stuff, the improvements. You got to know what your false self is and not be fooled by the false self. So you can't be fooled by the finishings. So let's go through what's the false self. And so in chapter 9, we go through in great detail the false self. And the false self, we talk about in the book about it being the ego. The ego is the false self, and ego stands for edging God out. The ego stands for edging God out. And so there's basically like seven characteristics or seven phases of the ego. And so let's go over those seven characteristics and those seven phases. And we're going to talk about how it kind of trips us up and it mimics, or you have an identity crisis and you identify with one, two, or multiple characteristics of the ego. So I'll give you an example for myself. I identified with being a realtor when I discovered this process, that when the real estate market crashed and my ability to be a successful realtor was severely affected, I had an identity crisis. And so the problem with identifying who you are by what you do is that if you lose that ability to do what you do, then who are you now? So this is the reason why you see CEOs who get paid millions of dollars or six figures or seven figures of companies, they take their lives or they fall into major depression because they identify as who I am is what I do. Same thing with a loss of a loved one. You can have the same effect. You can identify as being somebody's spouse, somebody's mother, somebody's father, somebody's son, somebody's daughter, so much that you don't know how to function as a person without fulfilling that role. And you see that a lot of times when the kids leave the house, the parents don't know what to do with themselves anymore. And so that's, one of the characteristics too. So let's go through the main characteristics of the false self. So the ego says, I am what others think of me. That's a characteristic of the ego. Another characteristic of the ego is I am what I do. I'm my profession. I'm my role. I'm what other people think of me. I am what I do. Another one is I am what I have, my possessions. So if you lose a possession, you have identity crisis. Another characteristic is I am my accomplishments. So if you stop winning awards, you stop being in first place, you stop getting the trophies, who are you now? And then the second to last part is I'm separate from others. And so this is one of the major um, parts of the ego that a lot of people struggle with. And I think about as a society, we deal with this a lot. So we all come from the same source. So the Bible says in Romans, God does not show favoritism. So the feeling that nobody understands me, I'm not like everybody else, is just simply not true. The truth is everybody is special. The truth is everyone is different. Just everyone is not aware that they're special and different. So if we think about how politics, religion, and race separates us, so you may have the exact expression of God's love or the exact talent or the gift or thing that somebody wants or needs, but that separation part of the ego prevents this connection. And so we see that a lot in our society. And so that's why I like the term namaste. So namaste means I honor the God in you, which also is in me. So this is a great reminder that we're all connected spiritually. So I believe the world would be a much better place if we became more aware and reminded ourselves that we're all connected. No one person is better than the other, but we got things, all these separations, race, color, religion, politics, all these things that um, seemingly separate us. And the last and kind of like the most egregious part of the ego is the last part of the ego says, I'm separate from God. So this is like the most damaging part of the false self of the ego. It has you thinking you're separate from God. So the ego says there's God in the sky, and then there's me. So it's my intent to show you that God is with you at all times, and it's impossible for you to be separated from God. So to start off, you may have difficulty accepting or understanding this because of how you grew up as a child. So if God is the source of all things, and then we come from God, and if we come from God, then we're connected to the source. So I go over this in great detail in the chapters, but for now, just know that you're not separate from God. To feel separated from God is the true definition of being unsaved, unconscious, and unaware. And so that's a lot of times that we struggle. So, another scripture in the Bible says, the kingdom of God is within. There's a quote from one of my favorite authors, Wayne Dyer, and he says, you have two choices in life. You're either a host to God or you're a hostage to ego. And so those are the characteristics and those are the identity crisis that a lot of us go through with the ego. And so it's important that we not be fooled by ego, and we got to know who the real you is. And so in the book, I talk about how not to be fooled by ego. So um, I want you to think about each characteristic of the ego. And if you really think about it, this can't be the real you. So if you think about all the characteristics, you think about all the faces of the ego. So whatever you have, so the ego says, I am what I have. Whatever you have, you once didn't. So how can that be you? Whatever you do, there was a time when you didn't. So that's not you either. You're not a realtor because at one time I wasn't a realtor no more. So how can that be the real me? I am what other people think of me. Opinions come and go. Somebody can change their opinion. Um, they can change their opinion like the weather, and you don't have no control over that. So how can that be part of you? How can that be who you are? One of my favorite movies is The Usual Suspects. And there's a line in the movie that says the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world that he didn't exist. And so I have a different take on this that I talk about in the book. The greatest trick in the world is convincing you that the God in you doesn't exist. So don't be fooled by your false self telling you that you're separate from God. And so chapter 9 is all about um, recognizing the false self and how not to be fooled by it. Let's get into chapter 10. Chapter 10 is called Getting Rid of the Source of Your Negative Thoughts, Actions, and Feelings. So we need to get to the source. There's usually and generally like one main area or characteristic of the ego that you strongly identify with. So, like I talked about last week or the week before, it's like this one area, it's one thing that got us tripping, that's got you tripping. So, to do this, to identify that, is we need to go back to the parts of the ego and determine which part we've falsely identified with or falsely gravitated to. So, quick mind rehab tip that I talk about in the book is you can't heal what you don't reveal. You can't heal what you don't reveal. You can't fix what you haven't identified as broken. So, if we talk about the subtitle, you repair the broken places inside. All right, so in the book, I talk about a story from my journey of going through the mind rehab process and dealing with the ego and how I was able to identify um, the source of my negative thoughts, actions, and feelings. And so when I was like 13 or 14, I got into an argument with my mom. And so at this point, I don't even remember what the argument was about. And so I got into an argument with my mom, and to give you a little bit of a backstory, um, she, my mom had a drinking problem, and so um, our relationship was strained to say the least. So this was one of those times where she was drunk, or the next day after being drunk. like starting to sober up. So, anyways, I can't even remember what the argument was about, but I will never forget how it made me feel. So, this is why it's so important to focus on the source of our feelings. So, the conversation escalated to the point of me saying that, like, I didn't want to live with her no more. I don't want to live with you no more. And so she responded to me saying that I don't want to live with her no more by throwing a pot at me and saying that she hated me. So I've been able to pinpoint and identify this statement as one of the most damaging things anybody ever said to me in my life. So I took her saying that she hated me as I'm not loved. And if I'm not loved, then I'm not lovable. So this wasn't until years later and me becoming a grown man, like well into my 30s, that I realized that this was the source of my issue of not loving myself properly or to the degree that I should or could. Um, and so when you have a parent, a mother, or anyone that has influence over your life tell you that in your mind and in your eyes they don't love you, it can have you feeling less valuable if you let it. So the I am what others think of me characteristic of the ego is what had me tripping for a very long time. So deep down inside, even though I didn't, think about it every day, I didn't value myself the way I should because I still felt that if my own mother didn't love me, how valuable could I be? And so you may listen to my story and be like, well, of course your mom had to love you, right? Yeah, she did. My mom did love me. Um, but I realized that what was said out of anger and probably while she was drunk. But I was led by ego in this area. And so this is my whole point. You can't buy the opinions of others, whether it's good or bad. Your sense of value and self worth has to come from you and only you. You have the power to determine that value. And so that's an example of, the ego. So when I first discovered the mind rehab process, it was the profession thing. I identified with being a realtor. I felt like that was taken away from me, and I had an identity crisis. And so I went on a journey to discover who I am, what's the real me, what is the ego, what are the characteristics. And so these chapters focus on who you're not, the false self, and how to strip away who you are not. Um, Identifying the one area, the one characteristics that's got you tripping. So when I first discovered this process, it was about the profession thing. It was about the identity thing. When I really got into it, this thing had me tripping. I identified something that happened way back when I was, you know, 13, 14 years old. That was an identity thing. And so, as we get to be adults and able to make decisions ourselves and go through things ourselves, we have to identify the ego because the ego can have us tripping. It's an identity crisis. And so when you don't know who you are, you can be carried off by one of those main characteristics of the ego. And so in these chapters, that's what we talk about, that's what we go over. And that's one thing that we're able to identify. If you can identify what's broken, if you can identify the one thing that's got you tripping, the main part that you have an issue with, then you can move on to healing. Then you can move on to repairing. Then you can find out who the real you is. And so that's what chapters 8 through 10 is all about. So I thank everybody for getting on the live tonight. I will open it up real quick for questions. If you join the live in midway or towards the end, I put the link in the chat that you can go back to the lives from the previous week. So this is week 3. It's 6 weeks. I'm going through all of the phases leading up to the book launch. Praying that everything goes well and we can launch and be rocking and rolling by March 14th. I appreciate all of you guys' support. And next week, we're going to get into the next phase. And so tonight, we talked about the demo phase. Next week, we're going to talk about the restoration phase, finding out the real you, finding out what your gift is or what I call your genius is. And so, thank everybody for joining the live today. This is chapters 8 through 10. I only did 3 chapters because these are kind of long and it had a lot of, steps and characteristics. And so, yeah, man, thanks for everybody for getting on the live. I'm excited. Hope everybody can come out for the book launch and just give a second if you got any questions or anything. And I appreciate everybody getting on the live. Cool, cool. So I do this every Monday, 7 p.m. Pacific. If you're not on um, Las Vegas time zone, 7 p.m. on Mondays. And so see you back next week for week 4. See y'all next week.